that stuff, you know.
Yeah. So that's the middle one, or the one?
No, that's the middle one. You start off with a center plate, and you put in number 2, then your intermediate, then you put in number 3. Basically, from here back, it's like a 13B. Then you flip it around, and then you add the front one. Basically, this is where we're at right now. Just put the number 1 rotor in, put the shaft through. Now I want to put the dowel pins. All the housings have been epoxy. I'm going to put the correct sealants, different viscosity sealants in different places. Like there's Hylamar behind the water seals and the compression seal. Around the bottom here, I use a low viscosity silicone, and then around the epoxy sections of the rotor housings, I use a very heavy grade, very heavy viscosity General Motors sealant to further protect any water from getting into the epoxy. It's already been, you know, I did it last weekend, so it's already been done and cured for over a week. And it's about a 3-day process to do this, because you have to lay it on there. You see, that's hard as a base metal. You know, you have to put it in, get all the air out of it, let it cure, then flip it around, do the other side, do the same thing, and then we put, you know, once it's anchored in and cured, we put some grooves inside and prepare the surfaces so that, you know, the epoxy can actually dig into, not just lay in the cavity. Then we'll put up a layer of heavy viscosity, this stuff right here, very, very heavy viscosity, as an extra barrier for water to even get to touch this epoxy. The epoxy on the number 2 and the number 3 rotor housings on this engine failed. Number 3 was actually getting water inside of it, and then I did this housing 2 years ago, and the epoxy is absolutely immaculate. And this engine was just a year old when it started passing water internally. So if the process is done correctly, it will last.
Right.
Actually, that's the housing that I need right now.
That's part of the assembly?
Yeah. I've changed the position of the housings and the rotors from how the engine was originally assembled, and obviously the crank was balanced with the rotors in the right location. The reason why I did it is because we already know for a fact that this epoxy is absolutely cured and rock solid after 2 years of competition. Well, they didn't really run it that hard, but they ran the engine at least 5 or 6 times, including a 500 miler. So, and it's also, you know, we also know that the center rotor runs the hottest. So I have the greatest confidence in this housing and this epoxy treatment. And then we'll put the new stuff in the front and the rear.
That's easier to get to too if you have a failure.
Exactly.
Have you ever had a failure with your epoxy?
No. And I really mean no.
So you don't just use any epoxy you can buy at CVS or something?
No. I mean, you know, this is, look, there's industrial grade epoxies, and there's domestic grade epoxies, and there's, aerospace grade epoxies.
And you're in the latter category with this stuff, right?
They all, you know, the cost goes along with the properties. You know, if it's aerospace, it's going to cost you quite a bit more, but you know, your end result is going to be that much better. You know, I've heard people go using JB Weld, you know, to block off some of the areas that's got to be blocked off. I mean, that's fine, and that'll work for a couple of months, but it's going to come apart. Put JB Weld on anything, it's just a Band-Aid, you know?
Yeah.
It's why everybody sells it. But this stuff here, I have to order it. Takes me, you know, if there's a minimum order, you saw what the freight charges were. Hazardous material, not even hazardous. Not even hazardous. Anyway.
So a shitload of red warnings on it.
Yeah, the word wasn't even hazardous. It was something else. I have to look at the invoice. A 4-pound box was $106 to come from Ohio to Miami, in shipping on top of the cost of the epoxy, just because it had a controlled substance or hazardous or whatever the hell they call it. Side plates or side housings, we put a low viscosity silicone sealer. It actually flows very, very, very well. Reason is that you want it to squeeze out quickly. Because if not, the actual housing versus, or rather, the actual housing to side plate seal. I mean, this would be a gross exaggeration, but if that was a heavy silicone, if it hardens, the housing of the side plate would not seal properly. And at this point, I'm getting ready to drop the rotor housing onto the rotor. So put a little bit of Vaseline here in the dowels to aid it in sliding down.
Where would how would the oil get through that part?
No, the oil goes across through the top one only. The bottom one doesn't.
Yeah, but you said if you're not careful with that, the oil will...
Oh yes, because if the rotor housing doesn't quite match up with the side plate after you torque it, there's oil down here.
Okay.
You know, and this you have one pickup tube for the dry sump pump here and the other one here. So eventually, oil gets hot, everything begins to expand. You have a surface that's not hermetically sealed, that you have maybe 1/10,000th of 1,000, you know, of a little air pocket or something, and motor begins to expand, that thing grows, thin oil will work its way out. Oil will work its way out. Oil leaks. If you haven't done anything possible within your power to prevent an oil leak, guaranteed you're going to have an oil leak. Actually, the sump on these engines are under a couple of pounds of vacuum. Probably like 4 or 6 inches of vacuum, because the dry sump pump is so powerful that the scavenge sections are very, very, very strong. Now we're going to go ahead and drop the rotor housing onto the rotor.
Silicone on the other side?
No, because these are two parting surfaces, and when they compress, they'll tag up. So I've got the housing in here. I've got a rubber band around the apex fuse to hold them in place. I'm going to cut it now, take it out. Take my little socket out of the way, hold it, and drop it. It's going to snug them down until you see the silicone begin to squeeze out, so that we can continue the stack up process. At this point, we have to put in our apex seal side piece and clock the crankshaft in the proper orientation to slide the thin intermediate housing. That's probably the and the 13B. The clocking of the crankshaft is at about 2 o'clock. That allows it to move and get the cavity through the bearing. Now we're going to put in the 3 little corners, and that's a task in itself because they can pop out during the assembly process. So I add a little bit of super glue to them, let them set, and that allows me to put the intermediate housing without the worry of having one of those little corners pop out.
Do you have to put more silicone here?
No, the silicone goes on the side housing.
No.
From up through 1985, the O-ring seals went on the rotor housings. Then from 1986 through 2002, they changed to put the compression seals on the side housings, the steel plates, or what people call the irons. Why? No idea. It always seemed that the aluminum was stronger because on the cast iron plates, the amount of material left over is very, very, very shallow. Where the location of the compression seals go and the water seals. Funny. When Mazda started building the Renesis, the RX-8, they went back to putting the compression seals on the rotor housings again. So maybe they realized that it was a better setup. I don't really know why they made a change. To me, it always seemed that on the aluminum was a better option. Industrial grade toothpicks. I guess these are party toothpicks or whatever. And just kind of clean the grease off of where the side piece is going to go, so that the super glue can have better adhesion. If not, you got to put too much, and then it spills over onto the rotor housing, and then when you spin the motor, it seems to have some little high spots that the apex seal has to jump over. Eventually it'll burn out, but it's just a pain in the butt during the assembly process. This doesn't give you the right feel. Feeling is one of your greatest assets when you're building these engines. I mean, you have got to have done quite a few of them to know what certain things should feel like. Before you apply excessive force and mess something up. Notice how that spring is a little high. That spring is also a little high. This is perfect. We're going to have to drive them down a little bit with a very thin screwdriver, because the spring location, particularly in these ceramic apex seals, is very critical. Not only that, but you've got the small secondary spring. It has to fall within the cavity on the apex seal. If you don't get it quite right and you get it off to one side, then the apex seal seems to push more on one side than the other. That will have catastrophic effects on a engine with steel seals. Ceramic seals won't even feel it, but the ceramic will eventually end up eating up the rotor housing if it's got way too much pressure on one side and on the other.
couldn't glue these to the long part of the seal beforehand?
And put them together? Hell no, they'll snap right so quick. The reason why they actually will not jump off is because as it is right now, you've got the side seals, corner seal springs, and oil control ring fully relaxed at full extension. Realistically speaking, if you could see it through there, you'll notice that the apex seal is above, I'm sorry, not the apex seal, but the rotor is above the rotor housing. Because you got the seals on the other side pushing it up. And then on top of that, you got all your other seals here way up.
Right.
So when everything gets torqued down, it squeezes into place. Right now, all the seals are at full droop, full extension, all the way out. So that allows me to get the little corner inside, being that the apex seal is shorter than the rotor housing by a couple thousandths. That's why you have that little side piece in there to take up the space. And we'll actually be able to jam it up against the rotor housing and it will stay. With most seals, you have to measure them and adjust them to the length of the main beam of the seal to get perfect compression. These ceramic seals are pretty much dead nuts on the money. Regardless, I still check them. But there's nothing better than them at any cost, and that's hence the reason why they cost so much money. It's more than $1,100 for 3 seals for 1 rotor. So you know, it's close to $5,000 for a 3-rotor engine and apex seals alone. There, I can see it. Take the little corner. Make sure it's in the right position. That little tip has to catch the spring. You saw the little dab of super glue move, and then I'll hold it for about 20-30 seconds. Make sure that it adheres to the main beam of the apex seal. That way it will not pop up. Edge that the corners have, both the ceramic ones and the steel ones have it. And you see how a little bit of super glue came out? That little edge is critical, that it catches the spring for a bunch of reasons. But if you get it wrong, if you get it underneath the spring, it won't do much, except the spring could actually walk out and scratch the side housing. If you happen to have it in the wrong orientation and it's sticking up, it will gouge the side housing. So the ceramic seals are so strong that in a matter of 10 seconds of operation, it'll destroy the engine.
I don't want that sucker popping up then.
Like I said, count to about 30 seconds and then let it go. On the compressor seal, I do a full loop with Hylamar. I like the Hylamar for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is that it's an anaerobic sealant where it never hardens until there's total absence of oxygen. Then it'll harden up. So you can actually, if you had an emergency, you can walk away from it, or you gotta go to the bathroom, whatever, you can walk away from it. If you were using silicone, from the moment you pour it on to the moment that you're done stacking the engine, you've got basically half an hour to 40 minutes to work with. Make one single mistake, one interruption, one phone call, one whatever. You basically gotta rip it apart, clean everything, and start all over. That's the reason why I've gone ahead and put in these screws to compress it Obviously they're not torqued, but this way it will squeeze all the silicone out and keep all the seals in place.
So that's the compression seal, the main one?
Yeah, this is the compression seal, the red one, and then the water seal is the outside one.
You don't use Hylamar on the water?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I use it only in the very hot sections of the engine, which is around the exhaust port and the spark plugs. There's not that much heat there between the combustion chamber, past the mechanical seal, which is where the rotor housing touches the side housing. Then you've got your organic seal, which is the O-ring. Then you've got your water jacket. By the time that you get to this outer seal, temperature has dropped quite a bit. So I don't bother with it. And believe me, if that thing breaks, it's because you already cooked the motor for other reasons. You see what I mean about the amount of material that's left over between, especially in the inside, between the seal and the metal. Well, you get the metal real hot, it will actually crack, and the seal will go into the jacket or expel it out into the oil sump. And then you can kiss that housing goodbye. A lot of people try to fix them. Everybody claims they've been successful at it. Yeah, you're successful for like a little while. Eventually, wherever you fix it, it's gonna break again.
How do you fix it? You weld it?
Yeah, they weld it with like nickel rod or silicone bronze or whatever. You gotta understand, anytime that you're welding on cast iron, you're putting a lot of heat into that area. Cast iron does not like heat. Cast iron does not like welding. Extremely porous. You know, you could do an absolute beautiful weld on a cast iron part, and before you're done welding over here, you hear tick, and that tick, you go back, it cracked the metal right next to the weld. Oh, the weld takes.
Yeah.
It just doesn't take wherever it ended up. Welding cast iron is an art in itself. Very few people have mastered it. You have to heat up the part extremely high so that the molecular structure is flexible, so that when you add your filler, they can both expand and contract at relative same rates. The reason why they crack is because the expansion rate and the contraction rates are different from hot sections to cold. You know, you're putting a weld right here, and it's cold right next to it. Believe me, that thing's going to shatter.
Right.
The difference between a race engine and a turbo engine or a street engine or a competition endurance engine, whatever, is the preparation and the technology that goes into the parts. Once the parts are at this stage where the rotors are already built, your bearings are in, all your seals are in, depending on the clearances, the temperatures you're expecting to run, the compression ratio, how well it's balanced, to what RPM you expect the motor to run. A million factors. The port work will dictate where the engine is going to be strong. If you need an endurance engine, if you need a torquey engine, you got a drag race engine that makes a ton of horsepower at 1.5 million RPM with no torque, you know, to at the bottom. I mean, whatever. All those variables have to be taken into account prior to this point where you're actually just stacking up the engine. Once you get to this point, everything had to be done. All the preparation work had to be done.
So the Vaseline and the rest of the spots is basically just to keep the seal in place?
Yes, exactly. Once you have the Hylamar in place and then, you know, the Vaseline, you can put your seals on. Then I hit it with a very light coat of dry graphite axe as a dry lubricant. I always build these engines dry. no oil or lubricants during the assembly process. Once I have the engine fully torqued, then we'll shoot a little bit of WD-40 inside. But the graphite is an excellent lubricant. Well, it's a dry lubricant. It's, you know, I learned about that from when I was an aviation mechanic. Not a whole lot, because this material will build up a coating. You just want to get a solid gray area without putting a lot of it. This thing will build up. Right now it's probably 3-4 microns thick. You get generous with it, you'll build up 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch. You put the bitch together, torque it, and the motor will not spin. I'm telling you from experience. This is a highly specialized tool. Could be made out of wood.
I think you should patent it.
Broomstick, piece of metal, aluminum, anything you want. The idea behind this is to put it in front of the crankshaft, the sensing shaft, I should say, and hold it up. You gotta get it to the right height. And you gotta cut off your excess.
You don't use any on that small hole there?
Not really. That small hole really goes nowhere. If you want to, we can put it on right now.
I'd hate to see the epoxy fall out of there.
No, the reason why I say that it goes nowhere is because that epoxy there is, you have the tube going right through it, and that tube, these are actually racing beat rotor housings, and everybody that makes peripheral housings has their own technique. My housings mimic the factory design with the intake port coming straight in. These come in at an angle, and doing so they actually screw the insert into the housing. I have to press mine in, which means I have to heat up the housing to about 300 degrees, expand it enough, and then press the sleeve in, let it crush when it cools down, and then we go ahead and weld it in several spots so that it can't move. Okay. Now comes the fun part. Not for me. I'm short, so I actually have to step on something. My other engine stands are a little bit lower, but I'm gonna go get a milk crate. Fuck up your back, man. This. Now at this point, something everybody should do, and a long probe. I like this one with a 90-degree end. Make sure in those corners haven't jumped out. Alright, that one's there. It's actually quite easy to do because all you'll feel is a flat, smooth surface. If you don't feel a flat that and this thing drops, that motherfucker jumped.
Yeah.
Now you got a major tear down in your hands. Everybody home. Now, pull this guy down. And there it is. That is the most difficult part of the actual stack up process of the engine. Now we have to lock it down again. We want to squeeze these side housing to the rotor housing down. Until we see the low viscosity silicone squeeze out. Everything's cool. Flywheel and just rotate it, get a feel for it. I'll do that right now.
The cool part about this engine is in a couple months we get to go to Homestead and watch it on the track.
Yeah, we're going on the 28th of November to race this engine.
That's going to be interesting. What kind of competition does this class have in it? Like
Porsches, some Ferraris. There's some really exotic cars showing up now, but they don't, you know, for the endurance race, which is 2 hours and 45 minutes. They normally don't last the whole race for whatever reasons, you know. There's a couple of Lamborghinis. There's one Pagani Zonda that's been raced. In this class, this car will probably win. It's won before. Main competition is going to be some good Porsches and a few Ferraris.
cool to see how she does.
Okay, well at this point we pretty much have the 13B part of the 3-rotor built. Got to put the rear housing on. Again, go through the whole sealing process. And then we'll partly torque it and flip it around and do the front. I'm sorry, the water seal and compression seal rings are completely clean. Make sure there's no residual sealant left from the previous build. You know, the hydrosonic does an incredible job of cleaning it, but you see how I'm scratching this up, how a little bit of dust is coming up?
Yep.
Okay. Pull that right out. These marks are just watermarks from when the engine was passing water internally, but they're watermarks. You can't feel them. It's just has tarnished the metal, and the actual housings have absolutely no step wear whatsoever. So it makes absolutely no sense to resurface them just to get them out when they do nothing adversely for performance. Obviously, if there was step wear or any other mark on it that you could feel from the oil rings or anything that the engine could have ingested, obviously we'd have resurfaced the house and take out 1,000, no more than that. Okay.
Those engines, the real one, that was made, so they have some dummy internals. How's it doing, though?
Now that we have the back 2 rotors built, what I call the 13B part of the 3-rotor, we're going to turn it around and slide the front lobe and drop in the front rotor and drop in the front housing. So at this point, we basically stand it up, put the key weight that clocks the front lobe at 120 degrees from the other ones, slide it in. It's already been polished and shot peened and everything. Polished it this morning on the lathe with a crank polisher. Line it up with the keyway in, line it up and drop it in. This is your number one lobe. Now we put the rotor in, then we put the housing in just like we've done with the rest of it, the front cover. Torque the motor and then stack up the front end with the dry sump system. This Hylamar stuff, I run it all the way around the compression seal and on the water seal only from about the upper dowel pin to about here, which is basically the hot section of the engine where the spark plugs are at, and on the opposite side right around the exhaust port. The rest of the engine is quite cool, and on top of that you have the water jackets to absorb all the heat, so the Hylamar really isn't necessary in the colder areas of the engine. This is what I was saying about this dry graphite. It leaves it very heavy film, and I can't get the aviation one I used to get anymore.
Is it torqued down and everything yet? Or?
No. I'm gonna torque it right now. I just didn't know I could move it.
Didn't want to move up and down. How many times do you torque it? 3 times? 4 times?
3 times.
Each time more?
Well, first of all, I tightened it by hand. I'm good for, without too much effort, about 25 pounds. Try to get it by feel. Try to get it to about 18 or 20, somewhere around there, all the way around. Well, I actually had 3 bolts in the front and 3 bolts in the back, tying the motor together to stack it. So that's why some of them have X's on them, because I have to put the other ones at like half torque, which supposed to take 32 pounds. So get them 18-20 by hand, then put in the rest of them, torque them to about 20 all the way around, then take out the ones that held the motor together, reseal and put the O-rings, get them to 20 so that everybody is pretty much every single bolt at the same torque. Then from there I go to 25, then I go to 30, and then I go to 32. So it's a very tedious process. What happens is that you'll see they'll all move a little bit. What happens is that I just start to tighten them up. They start going like that. You can't tighten one all the way because it'll there's a lot of springs and gaskets and O-rings in there. It'll squeeze. Then when you go back to it, it may not torque evenly, so you have to bring it all very, 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 very gradually smooth so I would press. Guess what? I didn't want to tell you anything earlier because you were doing really well. But
There's more bad news?
well, it's not bad news. It's just we gotta. There's no room for the air filter.
Air filter?
Yeah, gotta narrow it down.
The box?
So I just put the elbow, and the air filter's bigger than the elbow. The elbow just barely fits.
Right.
Take a look at it.
Yeah.
So we gotta cut off maybe about. That's how it's compressing. At this point, you don't want to snap a board.
Yeah, that would be very unfortunate. I gotta imagine that's some kind of a bitch to get out.
Yeah, you'd have to tear the whole thing out.
That's what I'm saying, but even so, how to get it out?